The hidden test. Olivier Blake had everything a man could want: wealth, power, and influence. He had built his empire from nothing, rising from the unforgiving streets of Atlanta to become one of the most successful tech entrepreneurs in the country. His name was known worldwide, his face gracing magazine covers, and his achievements were discussed in boardrooms across the globe. Investors sought his approval, competitors envied his brilliance, and the industries he touched were reshaped by his innovations. Yet, despite the accolades, the private jets, and the luxury penthouses in New York and Los Angeles, there was one thing he could never seem to obtain: true love. Olivier had learned from a young age that money could open doors that were shut to most, but it could never buy sincerity. Over the years, he had encountered countless women, some dazzlingly beautiful, others sharp-minded and ambitious, but they had all failed the same unspoken test. Their affection was never for him but for his empire, his wealth, his status. He had seen the shift in their eyes, that subtle moment when admiration turned into calculation. It was always the same, an unspoken realization that he wasn't just a man but a financial entity, a stepping stone to an easier life. That was why, despite being one of the most eligible bachelors in America, he had remained single for so long. It wasn't that he feared commitment, he simply feared being loved for the wrong reasons. And then, he met Evelyn Carter. Unlike the women who had chased after him before, Evelyn was different. She wasn't a model or an actress or a socialite. She was a schoolteacher, humble, kind, and full of life. She had no interest in high society, no desire to be in the spotlight. They had met by chance, at a small coffee shop in Charleston, where Olivier had been visiting for a business retreat. He had been dressed casually that day, just another man in a gray sweater and jeans, blending into the background. Evelyn had bumped into him, spilling her coffee all over his sleeve. "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry," she had gasped, grabbing napkins to blot at the stain. Olivier had chuckled, assuring her it was fine. But what struck him wasn't the accident, it was the way she treated him afterward. She didn't fawn over him, didn't recognize his face, didn't ask about his work or his wealth. Instead, she sat across from him and started chatting like they were old friends. They talked for hours that day, about books, about life, about dreams. And for the first time in years, Olivier felt like someone was seeing him, not his bank account. Their relationship blossomed naturally, free from the pressures of wealth and status. He kept his identity hidden from her, introducing himself simply as Ollie, a small-time entrepreneur who worked in tech. She never asked about his finances, never cared about what car he drove or what brands he wore. She loved him for his kindness, his sense of humor, his passion for life. And that was how he knew, Evelyn might just be the one. But there was always that lingering doubt in the back of his mind. Would she still love him if she knew the truth? If she discovered that he was not just some ordinary man, but one of the richest and most powerful individuals in the country? There was only one way to find out. And so, Olivier devised a test, a final, ultimate test of love. The wedding plan. The wedding was set to take place in a quaint countryside chapel, exactly the way Evelyn had always dreamed. She had insisted on something small and intimate, nothing flashy or extravagant. It was one of the many reasons Olivier adored her, she wasn't interested in excess. While most women would have demanded a grand venue, designer gowns, and a guest list filled with celebrities, Evelyn only wanted her closest family and friends to witness the happiest day of her life. For months, she had poured her heart into the wedding preparations, choosing delicate floral arrangements, handwritten invitations, and soft instrumental music for the ceremony. She never once asked about money, never once made demands. But Olivier still needed to be sure. On the day of the wedding, he made a shocking decision: he would arrive at the venue in the cheapest suit he could find. He wouldn't wear the designer tuxedos that were custom-made for him, nor the Italian leather shoes that cost more than most people's rent. Instead, he would wear a simple, second-hand suit that he had picked up from a thrift store for $20. He wanted to see how Evelyn would react. Would she be embarrassed? Would she look at him differently? Would her love waver in the face of apparent poverty? As he stood before the mirror in his penthouse, wearing the ill-fitting, faded suit, he almost laughed at himself. He looked nothing like the billionaire mogul the world knew. His reflection showed a man who could have been mistaken for a struggling clerk or a tired factory worker. And yet, this was exactly what he wanted. He called his best friend, Daniel, who had known about the plan from the beginning. "She's going to pass the test, Ollie," Daniel said confidently over the phone. "Evelyn's not like the others." "I hope you're right," Olivier murmured. His heart was pounding harder than it ever had in a boardroom negotiation. He had made million-dollar deals without blinking an eye, but this? This was different. This was everything. The arrival. As Olivier pulled up to the chapel in a simple, rented sedan, the guests were already gathered. He could see them whispering, casting glances at him as he stepped out of the car. His suit was wrinkled, his shoes scuffed. He looked nothing like the polished billionaire they had expected. His own business associates, who had come to support him, looked visibly uncomfortable. Some of them had never seen him dressed in anything less than a tailored three-piece suit. Was this really Olivier Blake? As he made his way inside, he could hear the hushed voices. What's going on? Why is he dressed like that? Did something happen to his money? Maybe this is a joke. But Olivier wasn't paying attention to them. His eyes were fixed on Evelyn, who stood at the far end of the chapel, her white dress glowing in the soft candlelight. She was breathtaking, a vision of purity and grace. As he walked up to her, he braced himself for her reaction. Would she flinch? Would she hesitate? Would she look at him differently now that he appeared to have nothing? Evelyn's eyes widened as she took in his appearance. There was a long, stunned silence. And then, something happened that no one expected. She smiled. A soft, genuine, heartwarming smile. "You look perfect," she whispered. Olivier felt his chest tighten. "You're not surprised?" he asked cautiously. Evelyn shook her head, taking his hands in hers. "Ollie, I don't care what you wear. I don't care if you show up in rags or a tuxedo. I'm marrying you, not your clothes." The chapel fell silent. No one had expected her to react this way. Some of the guests, especially the wealthier ones, exchanged bewildered glances. Olivier felt a lump form in his throat. He had been prepared for doubt, for hesitation. But instead, she had given him exactly what he had secretly hoped for all along, pure, unconditional love. And in that moment, he knew. Evelyn had passed the test of love. The chapel was silent. Even the rustling of dresses and shifting of feet had ceased, as though time itself had paused to absorb Evelyn's response. "You look perfect," she had said, and her voice held not a hint of sarcasm or discomfort, only warmth, only love. Olivier stood there, dressed in a wrinkled, second-hand suit that looked out of place in the elegant setting of the wedding. He had expected murmurs, expected uncertainty, even expected the smallest flicker of hesitation in her eyes. But there was none. Instead, Evelyn's hands tightened around his, her eyes brimming with emotion. She was looking at him the way she always had, as if he was the only man in the world. The tension in his chest slowly unwound. The test, the doubts, the fear that had plagued him for so long, they all seemed ridiculous now. The whispered reactions. Not everyone in the chapel shared Evelyn's sentiment. Olivier could hear the whispers among the guests. Is this a prank? Maybe he lost everything? Did he go bankrupt? How embarrassing for her. She should have at least asked what happened before smiling like that. Some of the guests were visibly uncomfortable, particularly those from his professional world. His business partners, investors, and old acquaintances had come expecting a grand affair, the wedding of a billionaire. They had anticipated luxury, extravagance, something befitting a man of Olivier Blake's status. Instead, the groom had arrived looking like he had pulled his suit out of a donation bin. Among them, his longtime friend Daniel watched with quiet amusement. He had known about the test from the beginning, but even he was surprised at how Evelyn had reacted. No hesitation. No uncertainty. She had proven her love without even knowing she was being tested. Daniel smirked as he leaned toward another guest. I think she just shocked everyone in this room. The wedding continues. Despite the murmurs, the ceremony carried on. Evelyn and Olivier stood before the officiant, their hands clasped together. The warmth of her fingers in his made his heart race. He could barely focus on the vows, on the readings, on the traditions of the ceremony itself. All he could think about was her, this woman who had chosen him, not his wealth, not his power, but simply him. When the officiant asked the fateful question, "Do you take this man to be your husband?" Evelyn did not hesitate. "I do." And when it was Olivier's turn, he felt his throat tighten. For the first time in years, he was overwhelmed, not with doubt, but with gratitude. "I do." The moment the words left his lips, the chapel erupted in applause. Whatever judgments had lingered in the air before were momentarily drowned out by the sheer joy of the occasion. Olivier bent down, pressing a deep, lingering kiss to Evelyn's lips as the crowd cheered around them. The weight in his chest lifted, and for the first time in his life, he felt truly free. The wedding reception, a shift in perspective. The reception was held in a charming countryside venue, a cozy barn adorned with fairy lights and rustic decor. It was nothing like the grand ballrooms Olivier had been used to attending. Evelyn had planned everything with simplicity in mind, favoring heartfelt moments over extravagance. The tables were decorated with wildflowers, candles flickering warmly against the wooden beams above. There was no over-the-top catering, just homemade food and laughter filling the space. But despite the beauty of the evening, the murmurs about Olivier's suit hadn't died down. He could feel the curious, almost judgmental stares as he moved through the crowd. Some of his wealthier friends had pulled aside Daniel, whispering questions. Is everything okay with Olivier? Did something happen to his company? Why would he come dressed like that to his own wedding? Even some of Evelyn's extended family, who had never met Olivier before, seemed confused. Her cousin, Lisa, approached Evelyn near the dessert table, her voice hushed. Are you sure everything's okay with Olivier? He showed up looking, well, like he's struggling. Evelyn frowned slightly but kept her tone light. Lisa, I didn't marry him for his clothes. Lisa hesitated. I know, but... What if there's something he's not telling you? Maybe he lost his job and didn't want to say anything before the wedding? Evelyn let out a soft laugh. Lisa, you don't understand. Olivier could show up in pajamas, and I'd still marry him. Lisa sighed. You're too pure for this world. Evelyn smiled and picked up a cupcake. Or maybe I just know what really matters. Across the room, Olivier had been listening. His heart clenched at her words. She truly didn't care. The test had been unnecessary, ridiculous even. She had passed it the moment she had smiled at him in that chapel. He felt a hand clap his shoulder. Turning, he saw Daniel grinning at him. You idiot, Daniel whispered, you were so worried for nothing. Olivier let out a deep breath. Yeah. I was. Daniel chuckled. But man, you should have seen the looks on some of these people's faces when you walked in. Half of them thought you were homeless. Olivier smirked. Let them think what they want. Daniel shook his head. So, are you going to tell her? Olivier exhaled slowly. That was the question, wasn't it? Would he tell Evelyn the truth tonight? Would he reveal that the man she had just married was not some small-time tech entrepreneur, but a billionaire whose name was known in every corner of the business world? Or should he let her enjoy this moment a little longer? The unveiling of the truth. As the evening went on, Evelyn was pulled into a dance with her father, a moment she had been looking forward to for months. Olivier watched from the side, his heart full. But he knew he couldn't keep this secret forever. After the dance, he took her by the hand and led her outside, away from the guests, into the open field behind the venue where the stars stretched across the sky. Evelyn tilted her head at him. "What's wrong?" she asked, sensing the weight in his expression. Olivier took a deep breath. "There's something I need to tell you." She frowned slightly but waited. "I haven't been entirely honest about who I am," he admitted. "I told you I worked in tech, but I didn't tell you the whole truth." Evelyn arched an eyebrow. "Are you actually a spy?" she teased. He let out a soft laugh. "Not exactly. I'm not just some small-time entrepreneur, Eve. I own one of the biggest tech companies in the country. He hesitated, but there was no going back. "A billionaire." Evelyn blinked. There was no gasp, no step back in shock. Just quiet understanding. Then, she let out a soft breath. "Okay," she said simply. Olivier frowned. "That's it? Just, okay?" She smiled. "I love you, Ollie. Whether you have $100 billion or not a single cent to your name, it doesn't change that." Olivier searched her face, looking for any sign that her feelings had shifted now that she knew the truth. But there was nothing. Just the same love she had always shown him. Relief flooded him. He let out a breathless laugh, shaking his head. "You really are something else." She grinned and nudged him playfully. "Yeah, well, you're stuck with me now, Mr. Billionaire." And as he kissed her under the stars, Olivier finally understood. Love, real love, could never be bought. And Evelyn Carter had just given him the greatest fortune of all. Love beyond wealth. Olivier had spent years searching for someone who would love him for who he was, not for the empire he had built or the wealth he possessed. And now, standing under the starlit sky with Evelyn in his arms, he knew, he had finally found her. She hadn't flinched. She hadn't gasped or suddenly looked at him with newfound admiration. Instead, she had met his confession with the same steady love and warmth she had always shown him. And that was all he needed. But as the night of their wedding reception continued, not everyone shared Evelyn's indifference toward money. The doubters and the disbelievers. Back inside the rustic reception hall, guests were still abuzz with speculation. Those who had come expecting a lavish display were whispering among themselves, casting furtive glances at Olivier and Evelyn. Some, like his longtime business associates, were dumbfounded. "I don't get it," muttered Jonathan Parks, an investor who had worked with Olivier for years. "Why would he do that? Show up to his own wedding in a cheap suit? It doesn't make sense." Vanessa Holt, a sharp-witted venture capitalist, sipped her champagne thoughtfully. "Because he was testing her," she murmured. "Olivier Blake doesn't do anything without a reason." Jonathan scoffed. "Testing her? Why? The girl's clearly in love with him." Vanessa smirked. "Exactly. He needed to be sure. When you have his kind of money, you can't trust easily." Nearby, Lisa, Evelyn's cousin, was still in disbelief. "You're telling me my cousin just married a billionaire and didn't even blink? How is she so calm about this?" Her older sister, Margaret, chuckled. "Because Evelyn has never cared about that stuff. You know her. She's been the same way since we were kids. She would rather have love than a fortune." Lisa sighed, shaking her head. "If that were me, I'd have at least fainted a little." Their mother, Aunt Ruth, overheard the conversation and chuckled. "Love built on money is as fragile as sand, but love built on trust? That lasts forever." A revelation overheard. While the whispers of curiosity and speculation swirled inside the venue, Olivier and Evelyn stood on the quiet patio outside, bathed in moonlight. The night air was cool, carrying the faint scent of pine and flowers. They had barely spoken since his confession, but neither felt the need to fill the silence. Finally, Evelyn smiled and gave his hand a gentle squeeze. "So, was that why you showed up looking like you bought your suit from a garage sale?" Olivier chuckled, rubbing the back of his neck. "Pretty much." Evelyn shook her head, laughing softly. "You really thought I'd be upset?" "I wasn't sure. I had to know for certain." His voice softened. "I've been with women before who, well, let's just say they loved the idea of me more than the actual me." Evelyn's expression turned thoughtful. "I get it. It must be exhausting never knowing who's real and who just wants a free ride." He exhaled. "It is." She tilted her head. "And now that you know I'm not going anywhere, what happens next, Mr. Billionaire?" He chuckled at the way she said it. Now, I tell the world I married the best woman on the planet." Just then, the sound of a throat clearing interrupted their moment. They turned to see Daniel, Olivier's best friend, standing with an amused grin. "Hope I'm not interrupting, lovebirds," he teased. Evelyn laughed. "Not at all. What's up?" Daniel crossed his arms, his eyes twinkling mischievously. "I was just wondering if I should be expecting some dramatic, grand reveal inside. You know, surprise. I'm a billionaire, and you all judged me for nothing." Olivier rolled his eyes. "I'm not that dramatic." Daniel smirked. "You literally came to your own wedding in a $20 suit as a secret test of love. But sure, let's say you're not dramatic." Evelyn burst into laughter. Olivier shook his head. "All right, fine, maybe just a little dramatic." Daniel chuckled, then gestured toward the door. "Well, just so you know, people are talking. Some are in disbelief, some are impressed, and a few are absolutely panicking at the thought that they might have treated you differently based on how you look today." Evelyn raised an eyebrow. "Wow. Money really does weird things to people." "Welcome to my life," Olivier muttered. Daniel leaned in. "So, what's the plan? Are you going to let them keep guessing, or do you want to break the news?" Olivier glanced at Evelyn. "What do you think?" She smiled. "Let's tell them. Not because they need to know, but because I want to see the look on Lisa's face." Olivier laughed. "All right then. Let's give them something to talk about." The moment of truth. Back inside the reception, the guests were still caught up in quiet speculation when Olivier and Evelyn stepped onto the small wooden stage at the front of the room. The soft chatter died down as all eyes turned toward them. Olivier cleared his throat, gripping Evelyn's hand. "First, I just want to thank everyone for being here tonight. It means the world to both of us." There were murmurs of agreement, polite smiles exchanged. He continued, "Now, I know there's been a lot of curiosity about, well, my suit." A few chuckles rippled through the crowd. Olivier smirked. "I'll be honest. It was intentional. I wanted to see how people would react to me if I didn't look like, well, me." The room was dead silent. And then he dropped the real bombshell. "For those of you who don't know, I'm not just a small-time tech guy. I actually own Blake Technologies." Gasps filled the room. Lisa's jaw dropped so hard it might have hit the floor. Jonathan Parks nearly choked on his champagne. Vanessa Holt simply raised an eyebrow, looking amused. Olivier continued, "I wanted to make sure that Evelyn was marrying me for who I am, not for my wealth. And she passed the test with flying colors." Everyone turned to Evelyn, who simply shrugged. "Honestly, I would have married him even if he was broke." Laughter and applause erupted, the tension in the air dissolving instantly. Daniel, standing in the crowd, whispered to Vanessa, "Told you she'd shock everyone." Lisa finally found her voice. "Wait. Wait. So you mean my cousin just married a billionaire and didn't even bat an eye?" Margaret patted her back. "Tough luck, Lisa." As the laughter and excitement swelled, Olivier looked down at Evelyn, who was beaming up at him. He had spent years searching for a love that couldn't be bought, a love that was real. And now, standing in a room full of people still reeling from the revelation, he knew, he had finally found it. A love that money can't buy. The revelation had shattered the atmosphere of polite small talk in the reception hall. Olivier Blake, one of the most successful tech moguls in the country, had just casually admitted that he had tested his bride by arriving at his wedding in a thrift store suit. And now, everyone was scrambling to process the truth. Some guests were laughing in disbelief. Others looked stunned. A few shifted uncomfortably, no doubt replaying their own reactions from earlier, realizing they had judged a billionaire based on his clothing. Evelyn, standing beside Olivier, seemed utterly unbothered. If anything, she was amused. Lisa, her cousin, was still in complete shock. "So, wait, you knew he was rich, right?" she asked Evelyn directly, her voice half accusing, half desperate for some logical explanation. Evelyn tilted her head. "Nope. Not at all." Lisa's jaw dropped further. "You mean to tell me?" She turned to her sister Margaret, completely flabbergasted. She actually married him thinking he was just some regular guy. Margaret smirked. "And that's why he married her, Lisa." Lisa groaned, throwing her hands in the air. "That's not normal. I don't know whether to be impressed or concerned." Evelyn chuckled. "I think I like that reaction." The laughter around them spread, but there were still a few people shifting in discomfort. People who had seen Olivier's simple suit and assumed he had nothing. People who had reacted differently when they thought he wasn't worth their time. And Olivier? He had seen everything. Money reveals, but it also conceals. Olivier had spent years in boardrooms, negotiating billion-dollar deals, shaking hands with powerful figures, and standing in rooms full of people who wanted something from him. He had mastered reading people, not just their words, but their intentions. So when he walked into the chapel that morning in his tattered suit, he wasn't just testing Evelyn. He was testing everyone. And what he had seen had confirmed what he had always known: money doesn't just reveal people's true nature, it conceals it too. Some of the guests, the ones who had always greeted him with admiration, had barely acknowledged him when they thought he had lost his fortune. A few business acquaintances had exchanged glances, some even hesitated to shake his hand as if he was beneath them now. But others, like Daniel, had treated him the same way they always had. And Evelyn? She hadn't even blinked. And that was why he knew, she was different. Facing the critics. Not everyone was happy about his little experiment. Jonathan Parks, one of his longtime investors, approached him once the initial excitement had died down. "Olivier," Jonathan started in a clipped voice, "I have to be honest. That little stunt of yours? It was unnecessary." Olivier raised an eyebrow. "Unnecessary?" Jonathan nodded sharply. "Yes. I mean, let's be real here. You're one of the most successful men in the country. You don't need to play these games. You could have given her anything, a dream wedding, the most expensive venue, a designer dress. Instead, you show up in a thrift store suit? What kind of message does that send?" Olivier studied him for a moment. "That money is not the most important thing." Jonathan scoffed. "Easy for you to say, when you have all the money in the world." Evelyn, who had been quietly listening, finally spoke up. "And yet, despite having all that money, Olivier wanted to be sure I loved him and not just what he could offer me. Doesn't that tell you everything you need to know?" Jonathan opened his mouth to argue but hesitated. Olivier smiled. See, Jonathan, here's the thing. I've been at weddings where the only thing people cared about was the price tag. Where guests whispered about how much the ring cost or how extravagant the catering was. And you know what I learned? Jonathan frowned. What? That the more expensive the wedding, the shorter the marriage tends to be. Jonathan stiffened, clearly uncomfortable. Olivier didn't need to say more. Everyone in their business circles knew Jonathan had gone through a messy divorce with his ex-wife, a woman who had loved his wealth more than she had loved him. Jonathan swallowed hard, then exhaled. Fine. I see your point. His voice was quieter now, thoughtful. But still, you do realize people are going to talk about this for years, right? Olivier smirked. Let them. The unexpected apology. A little while later, as the reception continued, Vanessa Holt, one of the sharpest minds in the tech world, approached Evelyn. Vanessa was a woman who had built her own empire and prided herself on always being 10 steps ahead in any business situation. Yet, right now, she looked almost awkward. I owe you an apology, Vanessa said, crossing her arms. Evelyn blinked. For what? Vanessa sighed. I assumed you had some sort of hidden agenda. That you knew about his money all along. I kept waiting for the moment where you'd start talking about prenups or luxury vacations. But you never did. Evelyn smiled. You know, it's funny. I didn't know he was a billionaire, but even if I had, it wouldn't have changed anything. Vanessa studied her for a moment, then nodded. That's rare. Hold on to that. And just like that, Vanessa walked away, her expression one of reluctant respect. Evelyn turned back to Olivier, who had been watching with an amused look. See, she teased. Even your scary billionaire friends are starting to like me. Olivier laughed. Vanessa doesn't like anyone. She respects you. Evelyn grinned. I'll take it. A love money can't touch. As the evening wore on, Olivier found himself sitting at a quiet corner of the venue, watching Evelyn dance with her father. The joy in her face, the lightness in her step, it was real. Not something money could create. Not something power could control. Daniel slid into the seat beside him. So, he said, are you done testing people yet, or do you have another surprise up your sleeve? Olivier chuckled. No more tests. I think I've learned everything I need to. Daniel smirked. And? Olivier looked at Evelyn, the woman who had chosen him even when she thought he had nothing. The woman who had smiled at him in that chapel, not because of what he wore, but because of who he was. And I've never been more sure of anything in my life. Daniel grinned. Well then, congratulations, Mr. Billionaire. Looks like you finally found something money can't buy. Olivier smiled. Yeah. And for once, I wouldn't trade it for the world. As Evelyn turned and caught his gaze, her eyes filled with love, Olivier knew, he had spent years chasing wealth, but this? This was the greatest fortune he had ever found. And it was his, forever. The greatest wealth of all. The night stretched on, filled with laughter, music, and the soft golden glow of lanterns hanging from the wooden beams of the reception hall. The unease that had initially lingered among the guests after Olivier's revelation had faded, replaced by a new kind of admiration, one that wasn't about his wealth but about the courage it took to put love above all else. Evelyn, still in her flowing white dress, was the center of the room, dancing, laughing, and embracing friends and family as if this were any other wedding. To her, nothing had changed. And that was what made Olivier love her even more. A conversation that needed to happen. While Evelyn was caught in conversation with her childhood best friend, Olivier stepped outside for a moment, needing some air. The night sky stretched out endlessly above him, the stars winking like distant diamonds. He heard footsteps approaching and turned to see his mother, Margaret Blake, walking toward him. His stomach tightened. His mother had been one of the few people who had remained quiet throughout the night. He knew her well enough to understand what that meant. She was thinking. Observing. And now, she was ready to talk. You put her through a test, she said simply, her voice even. Olivier sighed. Yes. Margaret studied him for a moment, her sharp eyes filled with something he couldn't quite decipher. Then she shook her head. You're just like your father. Olivier tensed. Mom. She held up a hand. No, let me finish. Your father was a man who believed that trust was the most valuable thing a person could give. He built his empire on trust, trust in his employees, trust in his instincts, trust in his own hard work. But when it came to people? To love? She sighed. He always struggled with that. Olivier swallowed. You're saying I did the wrong thing? Margaret shook her head. I'm saying you did what you thought was necessary. And in some ways, I understand. You've been hurt before. People have tried to use you, manipulate you. She softened. But trust isn't something you win by testing someone. It's something you give. And if you give it to the right person, they will never break it. Olivier looked down, absorbing her words. Margaret smiled gently. But you know what? You're lucky. Because even after your little experiment, she turned toward the reception hall, where Evelyn's laughter rang out. She's still here. Olivier let out a breath. Yeah. She is. His mother patted his arm. That, my son, is the greatest wealth you'll ever have. Evelyn's moment of reflection. Inside the reception hall, Evelyn stood by the dessert table, finally taking a moment to herself. It had been an incredible night, but she still found herself processing everything. She was married now. To a billionaire. The funny thing? It still didn't change how she felt. One of her old college friends, Sophie, sidled up beside her, nudging her playfully. So, Mrs. Blake, how does it feel to be richer than all of us combined? Evelyn snorted. I don't feel rich. Sophie gave her an exaggerated look. Girl, you literally are. Evelyn smiled, shaking her head. You know what's funny? I didn't even think about it like that until everyone started freaking out. Sophie smirked. Yeah, well, you were always a little too down-to-earth for your own good. Evelyn glanced at Olivier, who was still talking to his mother outside. Her heart swelled at the sight of him. It's not the money that matters, she said softly. It never has been. It's him. Sophie's smirk faded into a genuine smile. And that is why you're going to be okay. A shift in perception. As the evening continued, the mood of the reception subtly changed. At first, many of the guests had been caught up in the shock of Olivier's wealth. But as the hours passed, a different kind of realization settled over them. Evelyn truly didn't care about any of it. She wasn't suddenly flaunting her new status. She wasn't talking about luxury vacations or fancy cars. She was just Evelyn, the same woman who had been teaching elementary school just days before, the same woman who would rather talk about books and travel than about stocks and real estate. And that, perhaps, was what stunned people the most. Lisa, who had been the most dramatic about the revelation, finally pulled Evelyn aside. Okay, I have to ask, she said. Are you sure you're not freaking out? Like, even a little? Evelyn laughed. Lisa, do I look like I'm freaking out? Lisa gave her a long, scrutinizing stare. No. And that's what's freaking me out. Evelyn grinned. Well, get used to it. Lisa groaned. Ugh. You better take me on a vacation with all that billionaire money at least once. Evelyn smirked. We'll see. Olivier's final surprise. As the night began winding down, Olivier took Evelyn's hand and led her outside, away from the remaining guests. The air was crisp, the sounds of music and laughter fading behind them. Evelyn raised an eyebrow. "Whisking me away already?" Olivier chuckled. "Not yet. I have one last thing." She looked at him curiously. "Another surprise?" He hesitated, then nodded. "A gift. But not in the way you might think." Evelyn tilted her head. "All right, now I'm intrigued." Olivier reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope. "This is for you." Evelyn frowned slightly as she took it. The envelope was thick, the paper smooth beneath her fingers. She carefully opened it, and froze. Inside was a deed. A deed to a small school in Charleston. Evelyn's breath hitched. "Olivier, what is this?" He smiled. "That's your school." She stared at him in disbelief. He continued, "You've always talked about how much you love teaching, how you wanted to create a space where kids could learn without worrying about funding cuts or overcrowded classrooms. So, I bought you a school. One where you can run things exactly the way you want." Evelyn's hands trembled as she stared at the papers. You did this for me?" Olivier reached up and brushed a stray curl from her face. "Of course, I did. Because this isn't about my money, Evelyn. It's about your dreams. I don't want to change you, I want to support you." Tears welled in her eyes. "Olivier, I don't even know what to say." He smiled softly. "Say that you'll keep being you. That you won't ever feel like you have to change just because you married me." Evelyn let out a shaky breath. Then she threw her arms around him, burying her face into his shoulder. "I love you so much," she whispered. Olivier held her tight, his own heart swelling. "I love you more." And in that moment, under the stars, Olivier knew, he had found the one thing money could never buy. True love.